Hi, my name is Joe Bartlett, and this is Joe Talks, and this is a 1 year review of my Chevrolet Bolt. So I purchased this Bolt about a year ago, and like a lot of people do, I put a picture of it up on Facebook, and I got quite a few responses of people asking me what I thought about the car and what I thought about driving an electric vehicle. So I've had the car about a year now, and I thought I would do a review to show everybody what my experience has been. So one thing we ought to talk about before I dive into the electrical vehicle experience is to talk a little bit about the rebates that are coming up. So in 2023, there's some new EV rebates that have come out, and if you've been following the news, you might be familiar with them. So for qualifying new EVs, the government is offering a $7,500 rebate. Now this rebate's been around for a while, but a new part of the EV rebates is for used vehicles. So for qualifying used EVs, they are offering a $4,000 rebate. So that is one that wasn't there before and is new in 2023. And so these are only for qualifying EVs. So you'll want to get on the government's website before you go shopping for an EV and make sure that the EV that you are interested in actually qualifies for the rebates. So don't just assume that because you're buying an EV that it automatically qualifies, because it doesn't necessarily qualify. Now, before we get too far ahead, let's talk just a little bit about the Bolt in general and go over a little bit of background with it. Now, some people get the Bolt mixed up with the Chevy Volt. So what I bought was the Chevy Bolt. That's the Bolt with a B. Now, there's another Chevy plug-in hybrid called the Chevy Volt with a V as in Victor. Now, there's quite a bit of difference between these two. The Chevy Volt is a plug-in hybrid. That means that the Chevy Volt runs off of gas part of the time and then off of electricity part of the time. Now, compare this to the Bolt. The Bolt is 100% electric. That means it doesn't have any gas at all. Now, the Bolt has a battery pack that is 66 kilowatt hours, and it's advertised to get 4 miles per kilowatt hour. This means that it gets on average about 260 miles off of a full charge. Now, you can compare this to an internal combustion engine or an ICE vehicle that gets about 1 mile per kilowatt hour. And so this is for a car that gets about 33 miles per gallon. There are two trim models available on the Bolt. There's the LT version and the Premier version. So the LT is more of the baseline version, while the Premier has quite a few more bells and whistles on it. Some of the packages you can get on the Bolt are the Comfort and Convenience package, which is the heated seats, the heated steering wheel, a few other amenities. And then you have the Driver Confidence package, which is the package that has the lane change alert, has the blind spot detection. And then you have an upgrade to that, which is the Driver Confidence 2 package. And this package comes with all of the original Driver Confidence, plus it has lane keep assist, pedestrian alert, and stuff like that. And then the last package that comes on the Bolt is the infotainment package. And this is the package that has the upgrade to the 7-speaker Bose system and the subwoofer and some other upgrades to the entertainment system. And so that's basically the car in a nutshell. I won't spend too much time going over the nitty-gritty details. There's a ton of other videos on YouTube that go deep into the options of the Bolt, but that's basically the car and the options that you can get. Now, while we're talking about the Bolt, we should also talk about the recall. So if you've done any research on the Chevy Bolt, I'm sure you are familiar with the GM recall on the batteries. So there were quite a few Bolts that were having some issues with the batteries, and there were just a handful of bolts that actually caught fire. And so this was determined to be an issue with the batteries, and originally GM had recalled just a certain number of cars in a certain number of years. But eventually that progressed to the point where, and I believe this is true, that they recalled all of the bolts. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that all of the bolts that are going to be out on the market are going to have been under this recall. So if you go to shop for a bolt, you're going to find that all of the bolts are going to show up as recalled bolts. And if you do find a bolt that you're interested in and you do a Carfax report on that bolt, there's a pretty good chance that that car is going to show up as a lemon. And the reason it's going to show up as a lemon is because in the early portions of the recall, GM didn't always have battery packs available because they hadn't come up with a solution to the battery problem yet. And so for Bolt owners that were interested, they offered a buyback program. And so as part of the buyback program, that is what probably caused that Bolt to show up as a lemon, because the manufacturer had to buy it back as the result of a defect. But that defect, under this circumstance, was most likely due to the batteries. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't something else wrong with the car. You need to do your due diligence, but there's a pretty good chance that the battery recall is what would have shown that car as a lemon. So is that a problem? Well, not really. I don't think so anyway. That's for you to determine. But if you think about it, if you get a car that's got a new battery pack, one of the things about the recall is that it actually resets the warranty period. So the GM Bolt comes with an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on the battery packs. And with the recall and the new batteries, that basically resets the counters and the mileage counters for your warranty. So if you had a car that had 30,000 miles on it and it was 3 years old and you got new battery packs, well, your warranty resets at the time that the new battery packs were put in. So you basically get 8 more years, or you basically get your warranty reset at the time that the batteries were put in. And so that's a plus, and that's something to think about when you go to shop for a used Bolt. Another plus about the recall is that the new battery packs actually have a higher capacity than the original battery packs. So the original batteries that came in the Bolt were a 60 kilowatt hour capacity, and the new batteries have 66 kilowatt hours. So if you come across a Bolt that you like and you want to find out if the recall has been done, there's really two ways you can do that. One, you can go to the GM website, and there's a recall website where you can plug in the VIN number of the car and it will tell you if the recall has been done or not. But another way you can tell is you can charge the battery, have the batteries charged to 100% capacity. And if you look at the range that the display says is available, it'll show something around the range of about 260 miles. And you can compare that to the original range of the old batteries, which was closer to around 240 miles. So that's kind of a way that you can tell real quick if this car has new battery packs or not. So now let's talk a little bit about my specific Bolt that I bought. And so my Bolt is a 2018 model, and I purchased this car in early March of 2022. And so I had been kind of shopping around for a Bolt, and I had found one at a dealership in Kansas City, and I was interested in it. I was ready to buy it, but come to find out, as a result of the recall, all of the Chevrolet dealerships had the Bolts put on a sales hold. So any Chevy dealership that had a Bolt, they were basically just holding them. They weren't allowed to sell them. So I had put my name on a waiting list, and the dealership was supposed to call me as soon as the car had its new battery packs installed. And I waited and I waited and waited, and months went by, and I never got any phone calls. And so finally, I just got tired of waiting, and I went online and looked around at some independent dealers. And lo and behold, I found a dealer in Belton, Missouri that had a Bolt. And come to find out, independent dealers were not subject to the sales hold. So if they bought a Bolt at an auction or something, they had no restrictions. They could sell them as they saw fit. So I found this Bolt at Craig Motors in Belton, Missouri. And now I don't typically like to buy cars from used car dealers. I prefer to buy them from individuals. But this being an electric car, there really weren't a whole lot of them on the private market. So I went ahead and started looking at used car dealers. And at Craig Motors, I talked to the owner. His name was Ken, and he seemed to be a really nice guy, and he came across as seemed to be an honest person, and so I felt pretty comfortable buying from him. So that's my plug for Craig Motors. So if you're ever in the need of a used car, I definitely would recommend checking them out. Had a very trouble-free experience, and had their car for a year and had absolutely no issues with it. So now a little bit about my car. It is the Premier model, and it has both the infotainment upgrade and the driver confidence 2 package. So it basically has all of the bells and whistles that come on the car, which is kind of nice. In the process of researching my car, one of the most confusing things I found was that on a lot of the ads, some of the dealers, whether intentionally or maybe they just didn't realize what they were doing or not, but they would list both the infotainment package, the driver convenience packages, and then they would also list a package called the LTZ2 Preferred Package. And so I found quite a bit of documentation, obviously, about the infotainment packages and the preferred customer convenience packages, but I could not find anything that would explain to me what the LTZ2 package was. And I never really could find anything definitively that would tell me what that was. So if you happen to know what that is, maybe put that in the comments and let me know. But the best I could tell is that the LTZ2 Preferred Package is just a GM shorthand to tell you that the car has the infotainment package, the driver convenience packages. And so that's about the best I could tell. Now, there is a QR code on the side of the driver's door panel that you can scan with your phone that will tell you all of the options that are on the car. But when I scanned that, it didn't really explicitly say that the car had the infotainment package and the driver convenience packages. All it said was LTZ2 package. So that's where I kind of gather that the LTZ2 is really just the shorthand to say that the car has all of the options, basically. Now, I would caution you using this QR code. One thing I noticed is not all of the codes exist. So if you don't have the decoder ring to tell you what all of the different packages include, I would be careful, because the car could actually have options that aren't explicitly called out on this options list. So again, be careful. If you don't have the decoder ring, kind of take some of that with a grain of salt. So now my car also has the DC fast charging option. And so this is the option that allows the car to charge at the higher rate using the level 3 chargers. And so a level 3 charger basically allows the Bolt to charge at like 52 amps, I think, is the charging rate. And so these are the type of chargers that you would find like at a gas station, places like that. But like I said, when I scanned that QR code, the DC fast charge option didn't show up. but I know that my car has that option. So I think maybe that is something that is included in the LTZ2 package. Again, I don't have the decoder ring, so I'm not real sure, but one way you can tell for sure if your car is going to have the DC fast charge option is if you look at the charge port, there will be an orange flip down door that covers the charge ports for the DC fast charge. If you pull that down and you can see the charge port connections, you know that your car has DC fast charge capability. And that's one thing I want to point out is that DC fast charging is not a standard option. So you might think logically that all electric cars would have the ability to fast charge, but that is definitely not the case. DC fast charging is an option, and that is something you'll want to verify when you buy your car, if you in fact want DC fast charging. And so looking for that orange door is one way to find out. Another way you can find out if it has that capability is to open the hood. And if you look, you'll see two bright orange cables leading from the charge port connection on the side of the car to the center portion of the motor bay. And if it has those two big thick cables, that's another way to know that the car has DC fast charging, because these are the DC fast charging cables. So it's one thing to be mindful of. The Bolt uses an SAE J1772 plug for the charge port, and this is for level 2 charging. And this is pretty standard, I think, for most electric vehicles, with the exception of the Tesla. So if you buy a Bolt and you want to charge at a Tesla charging station, you will need a Tesla to SAE adapter. Now, level 2 charging is the charging that allows the Bolt to charge at 32 amps. So with chargers, you have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. So the level 3 being the DC fast charge, the level 2 being the kind of mid-range charging, and then level 1 is what you would consider a 110 outlet type of charging mechanism. So again, the level 2 charging for the Bolt, the maximum amps is 32 amps. And so this is roughly about 7.6 kilowatts. So you'll most likely want to install a level 2 charger in your house if you're going to be driving significant amounts every day. So for me, I drive about 100 miles a day for my commute. So a 110 outlet charger just doesn't do the trick for me. So the charger that I decided to go with was the Wallbox brand. And I went with the 48 amp option. And so you might wonder why I went with 48 amps if the Bolt can only charge 32 amps. Well, I wanted to kind of future plan a little bit in the event that I ever decided to buy a Tesla, because Teslas charge at 48 amps. And so I wanted to have that infrastructure in place if I ever did decide to buy a Tesla. And so this is my main commuter car. And so one other thing I did was I bought a secondary charger as a backup system. And so you can find these chargers on Amazon. And this is a charger that would plug into my dryer outlet. And this charger charges at half of the capacity that the Wallbox unit does. And so it charges at 16 amps, or roughly about 3.8 kilowatts. And so this is just really a backup unit in case the Wallbox unit ever failed. I would have a backup plan to get my car charged if I needed to get to work the next day. So the car does come with a level 1 charger that you can plug into a standard outlet. But being 110 volt compared to the 240 volt unit from my dryer plug or the Wallbox unit, it only charges at about 1.9 kilowatts. So it really is not feasible to use if you're driving a significant amount every day. Just to give you some reference, if you were to completely deplete your batteries and all you used was this 110 volt charger, it would take you roughly 30 hours to completely charge the battery packs. So if you're the type of person that just drives a few miles a day, it might work. But I think for most people, you're really going to want to invest in a level 2 charger. So as far as the other features of the car goes, like the dash display, the accessory controls, etc., they all seem to work really well. I won't go into a lot of detail. Again, there's quite a few videos out there and other sources for research if you want to dive deeper into that stuff. But I will say they all work well, and they are about what you would expect. Nothing special, but everything that you're going to need. So that's a high-level overview of the car. And so now for some of my own experiences, thoughts, and opinions on the car. So one of the first things you're going to notice about the car is when you look at the energy capacity, so compared to like your fuel gauge on a regular car, well, on an electric car, the fuel capacity is measured in kilowatt hours. So a gas gauge would give you an indication of how many gallons of fuel you have left. Well, on the EV, this is measured in kilowatt hours. So that's kind of something to get used to, is seeing the kilowatt hours usage. And so along with that, the fuel efficiency is measured in miles per kilowatt hour. So you heard me mention that briefly before. That is how all EVs measure their fuel efficiency, or quote unquote fuel efficiency. So the miles per kilowatt hour is the equivalent of what you would say as miles per gallon on a regular ICE vehicle. So just to give you a comparison, the Bolt is rated at 4 miles per kilowatt hour as the standard rate of use. A conventional ICE car that gets 33 miles per gallon would be the equivalent of about 1 mile per kilowatt hour. So a regular gallon of fuel has about 33.4 kilowatt hours of energy. Of course, this varies a little bit with grade of fuel, temperature, but in general, about 33.4 kilowatt hours. So a car that gets 33 miles per gallon is getting about 1 mile per kilowatt hour. So you compare this to the Bolt that gets 4 miles per kilowatt hour. Well, that is about the equivalent of getting about 120 to 130 miles per gallon. So that's pretty good. In fact, when you talk about EVs, that increase in efficiency is really where the benefit comes from. So if you look at the fuel cost for electricity compared to gas, you're really not getting that much of an advantage. So for example, I pay right around 8 cents per kilowatt hour from my electric company. So if you take 8 cents times 33, that comes to right around $2.64 a gallon. So really not that much different than what you pay for fuel, right around $3 a gallon, I think is where it's at today. So not a huge advantage, but you look at the fact that the car gets 4 times the efficiency. So if you're getting 120 to 130 miles per gallon, that's really where the benefit comes when using an electric vehicle. So that is something to think about. If you sit down and you start talking about energy usage, remember that the benefit and the cost benefit is really in the efficiency, not necessarily the cost of the electricity. So while we're on the topic of efficiency, another thing to point out about electric vehicles, just in general, not unique to the Bolt, is where the efficiency comes from. So when you drive a regular gas car, traditionally gas cars get really good fuel mileage driving at interstate speeds, but they get horrible gas mileage driving around town. Well, electric vehicles are just the opposite. They get really good efficiency driving around town, and that efficiency really starts to taper off the faster you drive them down the highway. So an electric vehicle, really good around town, but the efficiency really is not that good, relatively speaking, driving down the interstate. Now, don't get me wrong, it still blows the gas car out of the water when it comes to efficiency, but there is a difference in how gas cars are efficient on the highway as compared to electric vehicles. So just something to think about. Now, another thing you'll notice when you drive an electric vehicle, and I know this for the Bolt, and I think it's the same for most other electric vehicles, is the shift lever. And so something that you kind of have to get used to with a Bolt is that it only has park, reverse, and drive. So you can compare this to a traditional gas car. If you have an automatic transmission, you have park, reverse, neutral, drive, probably second gear and first gear selections that you can make. And that isn't the case on the Bolt. You just have park, reverse, and drive. The Bolt is actually just a direct drive transmission, so there's no gear shifting. So that's something else you have to kind of get used to, is that when you get out on the highway and you accelerate up to highway speeds, you don't get that. It's just a constant acceleration. So that kind of takes some getting used to. So it's interesting, kind of neat, but it's different. Now, the Bolt does have one other gear selection I guess I should talk about, and this is what they label as L. And I don't know what the L stands for, but the gear selection for L is for what they call one-pedal driving. And so this is a driving mode that you can put the car in when you're driving around town. And what happens when it's in this mode is that when you let off of the gas, it engages the regen of the car, and so you can manipulate your deceleration by the rate at which you let off of the gas. So you can speed up to speed the car up, but then you can also control how fast the car slows down by how fast you let off the gas. And so if you can get good at it, you can speed up, and then you can let off the gas and come to a stop at a stop sign without ever hitting the brakes. So you get the benefit of adding the amount of energy regen that you get. Plus, you can also reduce the amount of wear that you put on your brake pads, and you can prolong the lifespan of your brake pads by using this method too. And when we talk about regen, the car also has a paddle on the steering wheel that you can pull where you can manually activate the regen. And so that's kind of nice. Personally, I use the regen paddle quite a bit, especially when I'm coming off the highway and slowing down to make a turn. I'll pull the regen paddle just to kind of recover some energy. To be honest, I hardly ever use one pedal driving. So I think it's just a preference. Some people probably use it all the time. I don't hardly ever use it. So now, as far as the driving experience goes, the biggest thing I notice is how you have to manage energy usage. So this may not be a big deal for those who only drive like maybe 50 miles or less per day. But for me, like I said, I drive 100 miles a day in my daily commute. And so it is something that I have to be mindful of. So the car, like I said, is advertised to have a 260 mile range on a full charge. But keep in mind that these are not all usable miles. This is 260 miles on a full charge. So that's going from full 100% charge to complete battery depletion. And that is not how you're going to drive the car every day. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind of. So one thing your car dealer may not necessarily tell you, and this is something that I learned just reading on some chat forums, is that in general, in your day-to-day charging, it's not good to charge the batteries to 100%. So I don't have any technical resources to back this up, but this is something that I've read on several chat forums. In general, it's better on the batteries if you only charge them to 80 or 90% day in and day out. And like I said, I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but if you're one to err on the side of caution, I would say it's better to only charge to that 80, 90%. Now, my year of Bolt has what's called Hilltop Reserve, and that is a setting that will limit the charge to 90%. Now, I think some of the newer Bolts will actually allow you to program in the max charge, so you could put it at 75, 80, 85%. But for me, I charge to 90% every day. Now, I also read somewhere online that it says it's good to charge the batteries to 100% at least once a month. So once a month, I turn my Hilltop Reserve off and I charge to 100%. And I guess that is just to rebalance all of the battery packs. Again, I don't have all of the technical background to justify all of this. A lot of these things are just points that I read off of chat boards and other people who have had electrical vehicles in the past. So I'm kind of basing a lot of this as secondhand knowledge. So keep that in mind. I certainly encourage you to do your own research, and if you find out anything different, definitely let me know in the comments. But again, that's kind of how I drive, or how I charge my car day in and day out. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind too is that you're rarely going to drive your car and fully deplete the batteries, right? So in your normal driving, you're always going to keep, a 10% reserve on hand. And this is how you're normally going to drive your car, right? You wouldn't want to drive down to 5 or 10% and then realize you need to charge your batteries and not have a charging station available. So in general, I try to never go below 10% just as a safety precaution. I don't want to end up on the side of the road with a bunch of dead batteries. So I just keep that 10% buffer on hand at all times whenever possible. And so you think about this, right? If you're normally driving and you keep 10% on hand minimum, and your maximum you're charging to say 90%, well, that leaves you with 80% capacity, right? So if you take 80% of that 66 kilowatt hours, that leaves you with 53 kilowatt hours. So at 4 miles per kilowatt hour, that leaves you with 210 miles. So that is something to keep in mind, is that realistically, you're in that 200 to 220 mile range is the reality of what you're going to have to work with as far as range on your car. Now, something else to keep in mind is that this 4 mile per kilowatt hour spec, that is best case scenario, right? So that is optimum conditions. Now, the reality of the situation is, let's say, for example, it's 30 degrees outside. Well, if you have to run the heater, and you have to run your headlights, and you have to run your windshield wiper, and you're listening to the radio, and got your heated seats on when it's really cold outside, well, it doesn't take much to get that 4 mile per kilowatt hour range down into something closer to 2 miles per kilowatt hour. And I have seen my car run in the 2 mile per kilowatt hour range. So right there, if you take that 210 miles, well, you've just cut that in half. So now, on a really, really cold day, your usable range has now dwindled down to something closer to about 100 to 105 miles. Now, like I said, if you're only driving 50 miles a day, it's no big deal. But for somebody like me that's got a 100-mile range, 100-mile commute, well, now that becomes an issue, right, on the really cold days. So that's something I have to be mindful of, is how much energy I'm using. So one of the things I do on a really cold day is I try not to use the cabin heater any more than I have to, because the cabin heater in the Bolt is really inefficient. Like, it really sucks a lot of power out of the batteries. So one of the things I do is I try to use the heated seats more than I do the cabin heater. So again, read on the forum somewhere that the heated seats don't use as much power as the cabin heater. Again, I don't have any technical specs to prove this, but I will say that when I watch my energy usage on the meter, it seems like it doesn't use as much energy when I just use the heated seats as opposed to having the cabin filter on. Or, not cabin filter, cabin heater, excuse me. Another thing that I do is I actually use a electric blanket. So my daughter bought me an electric blanket for Christmas, and it plugs into the cigarette lighter, and so I use that electric blanket along with the heated seats, and I try not to use the cabin heater any more than I have to. And so when I do that, I find that I've got more than enough power left in the batteries to get me to work it back. So that's one of the biggest things that I have noticed as far as driving an electric vehicle compared to a gas vehicle. You know, in an electric vehicle, you don't have that heat coming off the exhaust that you can scavenge, or heat from the coolant system that you can scavenge off to run heat and defrost. You know, you don't have an alternator to generate electricity. Any power you get comes from your batteries, and anything you use that has power is going to degrade your range. So it's just always something to keep in mind. So and one of the other things, not running that cabin heater, what I have found to be the biggest nuisance about driving this car is stupid windows fog up all the time when it's cold outside, and I hate it. And so what I find myself doing is I'm having to turn the defroster on. I run the defrost just long enough to defrost the windows, and then I turn it back off again. And so I'm constantly duty cycling that defroster to keep my windows defrosted. And it kind of looks funny. Sometimes I sit there with my heated seat on, my electric blanket wrapped up around me, and then the windows cracked just enough to keep the windows defrosted on the really cold days. But again, if you've got a long commute, those are the things that you're going to have to think about if you have an electric vehicle. And again, if you don't drive that many miles a day, it's probably not going to be a big deal, but definitely something you want to keep in mind if you're thinking about getting into an electric vehicle. So now, something else I want to talk about with this car. So this being an electric vehicle, obviously has an electric motor. And electric motors, compared to gas motors, have a lot more torque. So this little car really accelerates fast. Like this, it's just a little Bolt. It doesn't look like it's a powerhouse, but I'm telling you, this car accelerates faster than any car I've ever driven in my life. And it really is kind of a lot of fun to drive, but I will warn you, be careful, because it can get you in trouble. I've had this car for a year, and I've already been pulled over twice. And so this being an electric car, if you're not careful, especially if you're on a smooth highway, it doesn't really make a lot of noise, and it is so smooth, you can be running over 80 miles an hour going down the highway and not even realize it. So I will warn you, be careful. This little car is fast, and if you're not paying attention, you can be going a lot faster than you think you are, and it may come back to bite you. So one of the things I have really found myself starting to do is I have been using the cruise control a lot just to try to make sure that I don't find myself sitting in front of some flashing lights again. So we want to try to avoid that if at all possible. So so one other thing, just a quick note, one thing to think about is this Bolt does not come with a spare tire. So it does have a spare tire well where you could store a spare tire, but it does not come with a spare tire as standard. So, actually, the Premier, if you get one with the infotainment package, they actually uses the spare tire well to store the amplifier for the radio. So even if you get a Premier, you're not going to be able to store a spare tire. But if you get the LT version, I don't think it has anything in the spare tire well. And you can find wheels on eBay or online, and you could match that up with a tire, and you could actually carry a spare tire with you if you wanted to. I decided not to get the spare tire just because I thought it would be too bulky to carry around. One thing I did do is I went ahead and bought an electric air pump that would plug into my cigarette lighter. So I wanted to have some way, just in case I came out from work one day and had picked up a nail and I had a flat tire, I wanted to at least be able to get that thing aired up so I could get to a repair station or something. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I do have a review of the air pump that I bought, and I'll put a link in the description below, and you can take a look at the one that I'm using. But it was really nothing special. It was just one that I found on Amazon, and it seems to work really well. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you go buy a Bolt, is that they do not come with a spare tire. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say most electric vehicles are probably not going to have a spare tire, just because they're probably trying to save every ounce of weight that they possibly can. So just keep that in mind. So I would say after a year of owning the car, I'm very pleased with it. It's performed very well. It's been really nice to be able to drive past the gas stations and not have to buy any fuel. It's been really nice not to have to change the oil every 2 months. Something to keep in mind. According to my Wallbox app, I have been using an average of about $50 worth of electricity every month. And again, that's at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. That's not too bad considering the amount of miles that I put on the car. The car had 23,000 miles on it when I bought it, and it has right around 47,000 miles on it now, so right around 2,000 miles a month. If we look at the annual savings, looks like this car is saving me between $1,800 and $2,000 a year, so it's not too bad, I don't think. Now the car has depreciated about $3,000 in the last year. So I bought it for $25. It was actually $25,500. And so I think now the car, if we do a Kelley Blue Book on the car, it is, depending on if you use the very good or the excellent condition, it is right around 21 to 21 and a half. So right around $4,000, I guess, it is what it has depreciated. So I don't think that's going to be too much different than what an ICE car will have depreciated. So I think that's probably going to be apples to apples. So take that for what it's worth. So we'll bring this down to the final question of, would I recommend this car to someone? So if someone were to ask me, should I go buy an electric vehicle? What would I tell them? Well, the answer is no. I would not recommend this car to someone. Well, at least in most cases, I would not recommend this car to someone. Now, if you're using the car like I am, so I use this as a commuter car. It's a secondary car. We have a gas-powered minivan that we haul the family around in. We go on long trips with the van, but I just use the car to drive to work and back, and drive to Walmart and town and other ancillary trips around town. Then I would absolutely say yes. This is the perfect car to have as a secondary commuter car. It is perfect. It gets really great fuel economy. quote unquote fuel economy. It has saved us quite a bit of money in the last year, I think. But if you were a single vehicle family or this was your primary mode of transportation, I would not recommend buying the Bolt or any electric vehicle for that matter. And you say, well, why do I say that? Well, it isn't necessarily the performance of the electric vehicle. It's just the fact that the cars don't have the range and the recharging infrastructure is just not up par yet. So, I mean, you think about this car, in reality, it only has a couple of 100 miles range. So, what do you do if you have to go to another city? Or what if you have a kid that's got a basketball game in a city that's 100 miles away? Well, this Bolt is not going to make a 100-mile trip or a 200-mile round trip. I mean, you're going to be on the side of the road more than likely. And chances are, if you pull over to charge somewhere, the chances are it's not going to be a DC fast charger. So I've only used secondary chargers away from my house a couple of times. I went to a department store and I used a charger. Well, guess what? That was just a level 2 charger. I went to visit a family member in the hospital and they had some charging stations. I pulled in and I charged. That was just a level 2 charger. So unless you know for sure that you've got a DC fast charger somewhere on your route, if you're taking a long trip, I mean, the electric vehicle just doesn't justify itself. I mean, what do you do if you go on a long trip and you've planned to stop and use a DC fast charger and you get there and it has an out of order sign on it? What are you going to do? I mean, you might as well get a motel room and plug your car in, and it's going to take you 2 days to charge your batteries back up. You know, so right now it just isn't feasible, especially if you live out in the rural community. So, I mean, if you lived in the city and all you were doing was city driving, then it might be feasible. You know, at that point, you could go rent an ICE car if you had to make a long trip. But for us, especially here in the Midwest, to have an electric vehicle as your primary car, to me, just doesn't make sense. But again, that's for you to decide. Everyone has to look at their own situation and evaluate their needs. And maybe an EV car is for you, maybe not. I can tell you I've really enjoyed it. I really like not having to burn. I really like not having to burn that money at the gas pump. It is really nice. So anyway, that's about all I have. I hope this video helped you. And if you have any more questions specifically, feel free to ask them in the comments. And again, if this helped, hit that like button and help me out and subscribe to my channel. And I appreciate it. All right. Thank you.